The member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise in the House to debate Bill 124, and it's good to be back, Speaker. That's why the people of Ontario elected us all here. It's to work on their behalf. And it's unfortunate that we weren't here for the last 5 months due to, I guess, the members opposite feeling that they couldn't work while they supported their friends in the federal Conservatives. But, Mr. Speaker, when we are here to talk about people's compensation and how they feed their families and put a roof over their head, you know, that's the job that people expect us to do. And I know that this compensation debate is surrounding our broader public service. These are the people who teach in our universities and our high schools and elementary schools. These are the people who keep our electricity flowing into our homes, and the work that they perform in hospitals and long-term care centres and, you know, right across our system, nonprofit agencies, and in all of the areas that are important to the people of Ontario. So, needless to say, the work that they do is valuable work and is appreciated, and they deserve respect. Mr. Speaker, one of the aspects of collective bargaining is that this is a protected right under the Charter of Rights and Freedom, and it's a very hard-fought and an important right for reasons, because if we didn't need to have these types of protections, then they wouldn't be there. They're there for specific reasons, and they were hard-fought and hard-won. One of the comments that I heard from the member opposite was around the justification for putting this 1% cap on that Bill 124 will impose, and that justification is a provincial deficit. Mr. Speaker, this is something that the government under Premier Ford has really sold to Ontarians, that there is this deficit, and therefore you have to experience deep cuts to public services. And we know that the Financial Accountability Officer has shown that the deficit in Ontario is not what the government has purported it to be, that it in fact is much less. The recent public accounts that were published, it was not a $15 billion deficit that we've been told is in Ontario under Premier Ford's government. It actually is a $7.4 billion deficit. And we also know that in that number, within that number, hidden within that number, there are decisions that are being made by that government to inflate that deficit. So is there really that justification to cut services that people depend on, to hold back the ability of these very important employees to their rights to collectively bargain? For that reason, that is something that has been created by the government. And so when we look at Bill 124 imposing a 3-year compensation caps at 1% each year, and really taking away that freedom to negotiate based on the work that is being performed, based on the conditions in that work environment, based on market conditions, cost of living conditions, I think that's an injustice. And this government needs to recognize that we are already doing very much in Ontario to keep the costs of public services low. In fact, when you compare what Ontario spends on a per-person basis, per capita basis, we are the lowest in Canada, of all provinces, in terms of program spending. And, Mr. Speaker, in fact, we're also the lowest in Canada in terms of revenues per capita as well. So we're already, as Ontarians, being as efficient as we can. And of course, if there are other ways that we can become more efficient, we should do that. That's the prudent thing to do. But to put that all on the backs of our public sector workers, you know, those that are in hospitals, long-term care facilities, Crown corporations, power workers, children's aid societies. We know the valuable work that is being performed by our broader public service. And then what about the freedom to bargain, the freedom to collectively bargain, which is guaranteed under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, under Section 2D of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom of Association is protected. And with it is the right to collectively bargain. And this is something that we as legislatures should uphold. We should actually fight fiercely for that. You know, many years ago, I worked in an organization, and I was very surprised, actually, that there was a union that represented the workers, given the mission of the organization. The union that we were working with was the Teamsters Union, and they're a pretty strong union. And when I was speaking with the president at one point, I asked him, "Why is this union here?" And he said to me, at one point in the history of this organization, it was needed. And the services and the support of a union was needed to protect those workers. And that's how this particular workplace became unionized. So we don't want to be in a society where we in any way diminish those rights that have been hard fought and are protected under the Charter. This government has targeted collective bargaining before, and we've seen that in the removal of workers' rights and the right to collectively bargaining, starting with Bill 66. And it has been echoed in recent budgets, and it is clear that they're not done, that this is still an area that they are going after in this bill. And, you know, many members have stood in this House and have talked about the consequences of this and its effects and its impacts on real people. People like those in my riding in Scarborough-Guildwood. Speaker, the household income in my riding is well below the average of the City of Toronto. And I know how hard people are working. When the former Liberal government that I was proud to serve in raised the minimum wage to towards what would be more of a living wage, to $14, and it was to go to $15. I know that that affected many, many individuals in my own community. Their ability to put food on the table, their ability to put clothing on their children, their ability to keep a roof over their head. We know that housing affordability is one of the challenges that we face in this city and in many communities across Ontario. So what people earn and their ability to pursue wages that reflect their own value is very important. And I believe that the minister has thoughtfully put together this bill, but it needs to be reconsidered in terms of its impact on the everyday lives of people and their ability, especially our frontline workers who work tirelessly to ensure that everyone in this province has access to services. And what about those areas in the province, Speaker, that are struggling, in fact, to attract some of those frontline workers? I recently visited Northern Ontario, where they are telling me about the challenges of attracting personal support workers and individuals to do that frontline care. Well, what wages they are earning and potentially will earn for the value of their work is important. What signal are we sending when these wages by Bill 124 are capped and held at 1%, regardless of the rate of inflation, regardless of the cost of living, regardless of the circumstances. What message are we sending to those workers in terms of their value and the value of their work to this province? And Speaker, with the time that I have left, I do want to come back to the false message that the government is sending when they talk about the need to slay this deficit, a deficit that they have themselves manufactured so that they can justify cutting valuable public services in healthcare, social services, education, public health. I actually just saw people marching with placards, demanding that their public health services be restored, because we know how valuable those services are to individuals. And these types of cuts are just reckless, because they're putting people's lives and livelihoods at risk. This government promised, when they were running for office, that they would not cut any jobs. That was one of the promises that were made. But that's been broken time and time and time and time again. When we look at our autism workers, they're losing their jobs because of the chaos being created in the autism sector. We know that teachers and education workers are losing their position. The Financial Accountability Officer estimates that to be 5,000 teacher positions that will be cut, or as the government likes to put it, not replaced. What's the difference? When young people, students in classrooms, won't have that caring adult in the classroom, whether you fire that teacher or you don't replace a retiring teacher, the person who loses is that student. They lose the impact of that caring adult in the classroom. And as I said earlier, when you look at what we are currently spending on government programs and services in Ontario, it is far below what other provinces are spending. It's far below. It's actually $2,000 per person on provincial programs on average that is spent less in Ontario than all other provinces in Canada. That's 20% lower than the other provinces. And this gap under the current government continues to widen. And there's a consequence and a cost for that widening. You know, I want to reflect just in the few minutes that I have left, Speaker, on, you know, when I worked in the charitable sector. And I remember when it was under the former Premier McGuinty was raising minimum wages in Ontario for the first time in over 9 years. And as a team, an executive team, we looked at the costs to our organization of that increase, and we put it in our budget. We said, we've got to do this. This is the law. We've got to raise the wages. What happened on the day that that minimum wage was raised? I remember the confidence of those employees with a little bit more money in their pocket. And in fact, the organization benefited from that confidence with the rise in productivity. I also remember, because it was a retail environment, that people were coming into our stores and our sales went up with the rise of the minimum wage, because people had a little bit more money to spend that day. So when we take care of individuals in our communities, and we have to remember that some of these wages that we're capping are lower wage earners. We have to remember that. This is the broader public sector. They're not all middle income, high wage earners, and we have to do what we can to make sure that people can feed their families, put a roof over their head, and have a life that they deserve in this province, Speaker. That's why The people of Ontario elected us, sent us all here, is to work on their behalf. And Bill 124 is a caution, Speaker, because it caps wages. It takes away some of those long-fought bargaining and negotiating rights that people have earned. Thank you, Speaker.